Hi, everybody. Um, I'm on here to go through the 12 signs. And as we go through the 12 signs, we're also going to go through the 12 houses, just make a bonus lesson on sort of how to see your way around the chart. I'm going to dive in a little bit more to looking at our own charts here as just like some bonus content. But for right now, what I wanted to do is just kind of like we went through the seasons with that write up I did on winter, spring, um, winter, spring, summer, fall. It's been a long day. And the way that that cycle works, I wanted to go through it with the astrology side and talk about that. So I'm going to pull up I'm going to pull up a look at essentially the signs. Here are the signs in kind of a slightly stylized glyph here. But I mean, it's pretty similar to the way that the glyphs work, just a little bit more square. We'll start here. We're actually going to start in the 12th house, so which would be the end, right? But we're in Pisces right now, and like we've talked about before, like cycles always come forward from something previous, right? So whereas Aries, the first house here, Aries in the first house starts a cycle and it starts a zodiac. It really comes from what comes before, right? And we've talked about how in the ancient mythologies, water tends to be the element that things arise from. And you have that here with Pisces and its water element in the 12th house. Um, and you like, yeah, I mean, Genesis, right? Like their waters were there and God separates the waters. Egyptian mythology, Ra or Amun rise up from the waters. Ptah rises up from the waters. Hindu mythology, there's waters that a goose egg rises from or Brahman rises from. And what's interesting here, a cool parallel with India actually, is so we have water energy that leads into the fire energy of Aries. And in India, the Agni is said to be birthed by the waters, right? The god of fire and flame is somehow birthed by the waters. And so you see this in this procession, right? Where that really mutable, dreamy expanse births the fiery, much more dynamic energy of Aries. And another place where you see this is kind of moving from that childhood magic dreaminess of memories as a child, and those flow states of creativity and dream into the more conscious nature of early adolescence, where you're starting to like you're still very passionate with Aries. The consciousness gets developed further along the way, but you're a lot more kind of individualized, right? If you think of like just being a baby almost in that dreamy Pisces, moving into that kind of more young, dynamic energy and Aries. So we've talked about Pisces. Pisces is a mutable sign, and you'll see this here on this chart. Let's see if I can make this. Does this make this bigger for you guys? Okay, cool. You'll see this here on this chart where the chart goes from, and I'll point this out in birth charts later. Chart goes from cardinal to fixed to mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable, cardinal, fixed, mutable. What is convenient about this in our study of the seasons is you have spring with Aries, Taurus, Gemini, summer with a cardinal Cancer, fixed Leo, mutable Scorpio, fall with cardinal Leo, fixed Virgo, mutable Sagittarius, winter with cardinal Capricorn, fixed Aquarius, winter Pisces. And so you have the four seasons here in astrology, but like we talked about before, because they're broken up into signs, it's a little bit harder to get the overall feel, which is why we're introducing the Taoist component. Also, my teachers worked a lot with me on the Taoist elements and components, so I felt like that's something I could really contribute to people in their growth and their learning in this material. But so you have the four seasons with that, and you also get this range of elements, so that each season ends up a little bit um, kind of dominated by an element, I want to sort of say, because you have fire with Aries, then you have earth with Taurus, and you have air with Gemini in spring, right? So you have those energies, but you don't get water until you get Cancer in summer, right? So you have Cancer in summer, fire, Leo, and then Earth, Virgo. Then you get your, for summer, then in fall, you get your Aries, Libra, you get your water, Scorpio, you get your fire, Sagittarius, and then in winter, we've got our fire, our air, and our Pisces, water again. So it creates slightly different elemental compositions for each one of the seasons. So if we just go through, we have the starting before, right? And the way that I think of this is if you a lot of astrologers who hold to past lives, I'm not yet determined on past lives, right? I leave space for people to have their own experience. But if you do hold a past lives, 12th house, and this realm here kind of speaks about like the past that we're coming from, whether it be a past life, whether it be early, like childhood. It's these states from before consciousness that affect us, right? And then you start a cycle. And as far as projects go, this is like the kind of like the dreaminess before we even fully even thought up a project, right? So, for instance, this course, this workshop, right? I was talking to one of our members today about how it kind of came to be, and I didn't imagine, I mean, I didn't even imagine this as a workshop until a few months ago when I was like, hey, I have all the material for this. I can do this, like, and I'm good at this. Before that, though, it was brewing in my studies with Rachel and Discovery, which helped me like recognize like, hey, this is a thing that I can like, this is something that I can work with and maybe teach on because I've been studying astrology for a couple of years before that. But really, the root of the focus on the seasons comes from writing work that I started 6 years ago, right? No idea that I would be starting a workshop based off of that. But it sort of got dreamed into existence from all these little pasts that these past seeds that came together to create this new cycle. So when we're looking into projects or we're looking projects years, however we want to interpret this, or our own life, this area here, this 12th house area ruled over by Pisces, it's that pre-dream, right? It brings everything together. It creates enough space for possibilities. It has maybe some excess information and dream imagery that we're not going to use, but it's there and it's mixed in with all the other resources that have come before, right? And then it starts to really differentiate itself here in Aries. And in the spring season in the Northern Hemisphere, that, I mean, that's when you start to see like the plants push up out of the snow, out of the mud, out of the dirt, right? The trees are starting to deciduous trees are starting to grow green buds again. You see life starting to spark and starting to burst forward, and that's this Aries energy. It's a fiery energy and it's a cardinal energy. Cardinal energies are all about starting things, right? Like it's passionate, wants to get things started, wants to get things going. It'll start a whole bunch of different projects. It'll jump into a whole bunch of new things, especially Aries, because it's fire and it just wants to experience it all. And it's like, we'll figure it out when we get there, right? It's not really making plans. It's just moving, right? Aries is in the first house, which is that house that is so much a part of us. Sometimes it's kind of hard to see it, right? It's just like naturally us. In the second house, we get ideas, we get possessions and ideas and things that we claim to be ours, right? Like, um, I'm Josh. Uh, I have a love for astrology. Uh, I'm a liberal, right? Like there are things I claim to kind of be me and part of my identity. In the first house, it's things that are so much a part of us, we don't always even see that they're there. So my first house is Gemini Jupiter. It's the fact that I want to learn about freaking everything, right? I want to figure this out. I want to figure that out. I just want to figure out everything, right? And so that's not the first way I'm going to introduce myself, right? I'm going to introduce myself with some of the things I claim about myself, and probably my public persona as a hypnotist and a life coach and astrologer. Um, but I don't just immediately start the conversation with I'm Josh and I have an obsession with figuring out a little bit of everything. Because what it is it's just so much a part of me. I don't even identify it as being unique to me, right? And that's really what that first house kind of rules over. And then Aries, which starts the cycle, the initiation, and those things so close to us that they just naturally have our energy and our passion, is ruled over by Mars, which is also a planet that deals a lot with energy and passion and drive, and that ability to push forward. Right, and that's necessary, and it's necessary for those things that are so close to us we can't identify them because they are naturally animated, right? Like my curiosity is a naturally animated part of me. I don't have to think about like, hey, I should probably cultivate this. I don't have to think about like, hey, do I want to own this in a public space? Do I want to tell other people about it? It naturally flows through me, right? And that's how it aligns so easily with that Aries, Mars, Cardinal, first house energy. Those all align together so easily because they naturally just flow. They naturally just burst forth onto the scene, just like the new growth on trees, the new growth of buds and shoots just naturally spring forward. The next part of the cycle then becomes Taurus, which is a fixed earth energy. Fixed energy, like that's what gets a project done, right? It's fixed, it's solid. For me, my partner is a cardinal. She's a Capricorn, so she just came to me today and she's like, oh, like I want to like we've been talking about getting ready for an international move, and so we want to like reduce our budgets. So we've been talking about moving into like a smaller space. She has a new idea. She presents it. She thinks it's great. She's like, let's do this. I'm blown away because my fixed Leo self, even though I have a cardinal grand square, my fixed Leo self is like, I thought you said you never wanted, she proposed that we move in with some friends of hers. I'm like, I thought you said you never wanted to live with other people again for the rest of your life, right? I thought this was how you were, and I thought this was how I am, and I thought this is what our plan was. And I, that's a lot of new information for me to take in. And while I love new information, as a fixed sign, it's difficult to just make those immediate jumps and changes. The benefit of the fixed sign though is that like it's pretty freaking stable. So while it's difficult to like jump into like, oh, okay, cool, let's just move in with a whole house of other people. It sorry, I don't mean to have this like come through here, but I think it's a good example. It That fixed sign also means like, hey, like you know me, like you like I'm going to be pretty persistent in who I am, like I'm going to be consistent. You can rely on that factor, right? And with time, like we do allow for changes, right? And we things grow on us more so, right? All my favorite music, when I first listened to it, was like, I don't know if I like this. Once I got exposed to it more so, then it's like, oh, I like this. Those are fixed signs. It takes a little bit of time. Earth, particularly, is very practical. It's very rooted. It's very much in this physical uh, experience. Backtrack a little bit with Aries. That's very much about the fire is about passion. It's about that dynamic kind of like zest for life, charisma, fiery inspiration. And then you have Earth, which ends up acting as a container for this. And that's what you see in nature when you have that Taurus season. Taurus season tends to be when you see flowers blooming, right? Like flowers are blooming, budding, blooming. They get pollinated in Gemini season, but they really start to open up and create this container vessel for what's going to come. And Taurus is very linked in with the body. It's very linked in with your environment. It's linked into your home. Um, and I mean, I tell a story of most guys I know, myself included, until we were in a relationship with somebody else, like our living spaces are pretty sparse. Like it's kind of like you have your practicalities, and you just keep to that. One of my good Taurus friends, he's the only guy I know who like his house, like even when he's single, it's like every room is just so comfortable to be in because it's color coded. He has nice artwork up on the walls. All the furniture matches. It's all subtle tones, so it's just nice and relaxing. It's all earthy tones too. Um, and Taurus is about that. It's very much about this embodied experience, right? And it is able to hold that passion of Aries and hold that in a vessel to really continue the rest of the cycle. It's in the second house, which is our house of possessions. And so that really does mean like the stuff that we fill our house with. And it's also the things that we own as like kind of a part of ourselves and a part of our identity. And it's ruled over by Venus, which is the goddess of love, but also really the connection between things, right? The connection that pulls things together. As we move on into the third house, which is really like, how do we gather information and spit it out? Not necessarily. Sagittarius is how we turn it into, and the ninth house is how we turn it into philosophies and views of life and these larger programs and paradigms. Gemini in the third house is a lot more about like, how do we take it in, break it down, and communicate out, right? It's a mutable sign, which is the sign, or it's mutable signs or adaptive signs. Pisces is a mutable sign. Sagittarius is a mutable sign. Gemini is a mutable sign. And then Virgo is a mutable sign. And that's really, it ends up typically being the signs for each one of those that like is able to most quickly adapt, really is the part of it, right? The way that Gemini puts this in is that it just soaks in information. It wants information from freaking everywhere, right? And then it works on processing that and then putting that to quick use. When it's supercharged, might not put it into use. It might just move on to the next thing to learn. But it has a quick recovery rate as it's learning, and it's adaptable. And where its adaptability with Gemini really comes in the most, I feel, is that it's able to juggle so many balls at once or have so many different faces, that it's immediately adaptable to its environment because it can play so many different roles, because it's gathered so many different pieces of information and it's able to talk in so many different levels, right? And so it's got that great multitasking ability, and it's ruled over by Mercury, which is god of thought, communication, commerce, and really that ability to create. So Mercury originates as a god of boundaries and the ability to cross over those boundaries, right? So anything that creates that exchange or moves from one location to the other really summons up that Mercury energy. And as we move into the fourth house, which is the house of really your home, like your home life, also childhood, like very much childhood and early living conditions, early living experiences, we move into the realm of Cancer, which is typically the sign most related to the mother. It's the first of the water signs since we started the process. And it's very much, it's a cardinal sign of water. very much involved in the emotions, and particularly that emotion of being able to nurture. Um, and also to be able to nurture and to guard at the same time, right? Because that's a function that's very necessary, in that motherly realm, is to be able to nurture and to be able to also protect and hold space. It's ruled over by the moon, who rules all the tides of the water, right? Rules over the interior realms, the interior spaces, the realms of instinct, and intuition. Cancers tend to, like, that whole watery sphere tends to have a lot of ability for intuition, a lot of ability for kind of that psychic space, and to sort of feel the vibrations in that cosmic water. And so you have that energy from Cancer, so that when we're going through it, like, you have that initial burst of life in Aries, then you have this sort of rooted vessel aspect in Taurus. um Things, and we talked about how flowers start to open up, start to bloom, things get pollinated in Gemini, and then they really start to gestate in Cancer. And you see that a lot with also moon symbology. The moon is seen to gestate each waxing moon as she gets closer to fuller and fuller, which is why we cultivate things with the waxing moon. And then when she wanes, or when she becomes the full moon, it's seen that she gives birth. And then as she wanes, it's kind of like a woman after pregnancy, right? Like the belly is slowly receding, right? And we're waxing now and we're releasing, and then the next moon cycle, from that point of the new moon where there's seen to be that sort of conception aspect, we start waxing in and she is gestating again. And so in that ability to protect and that ability to nurture, from that Cancer energy, we now have this ability to really carry things through full term. um, and that would be the ideal of the fourth house, right? Is that you grow up and with a child, and you grow up in your roots knowing that you're protected and cared for. Not always the case, right? And that shows a lot typically from the fourth house. Next house is the fifth house, which is the house of really expression. We're starting to really turn ourselves really out into the world, right? We gathered in, we said this is like, we simply were with the first house. We said this is me with the second house. With the third house, we started to communicate, gather in information, put information out. Fourth house, we started to let these ideas brew inside of us, let these concepts brew inside of us, let our projects brew inside of us. Fifth house, we start to express them out, right? It's also known as the house of pleasure. It relates to everything from gambling to artistic expression to um, consumption of things and our children. It's a house where we really start to interact with the outer world and delight in the outer world, right? And it's ruled by Leo, who is ruled by the sun, and that's the sun. It's shining, right? It's like I'm here, great, like let's have this life, let's do this stuff. And Leo really embodies that as this sort of dynamic actor figure, right? In its earliest form, it's really the child that gets birthed by Cancer, right? So you have that like spark of life, you have that that gets in that gets held by the vessel, that gets germinated, that gets gestated, and now in Leo it's birthed. And so Leo in its earliest manifestation is really that kind of that child figure who's like, this is also cool, I love it, like let's play. You see children, they role play. Leo is known for its drama and its acting. It's a great sign for actors. It's self-expression, and that's where you really start to see that is with children and with their self-expression and their role playing and the games that they play. and where they're able to just pretty much shine with that, right? Um, as Leo kind of grows, then it grows into more of that. It can grow into much more of that leader who is able to take that childhood play and turn it into, hey, how are we playing with life, right? And that goes to the more serious aspect of the sun, where it's like, yeah, we're shining, but like, why are we shining, right? What is the life path? What is the life goal? How do we shine the most in that aspect and in that incarnation? And then as we move up, we go to Virgo, which is another, oh, and Leo is a fixed sign. And that, sort of in the way that the sun always, I mean, the sun always does shine. Earth revolves, so we don't see it all the time, but it's a consistent source of energy. It consistently puts out there with its energy. We now have Virgo, which is a mutable sign. Let me gather my thoughts here real quick with Virgo. We're in Pisces, so we're opposite Virgo. And if you can't tell, this video has been a little bit scattered. So we're in Virgo, mutable. And the way that Virgo is mutable is that she's really great at breaking things down, right? Like, she's an earth sign. It's a little bit more of the practical side. We've talked about how Virgo has that sacred mystic sign where she imbues things with meaning. And in order to do all of that, she's breaking things down into smaller components. That's what brings around her organization. That's what brings around her ability to really like plan things well. She breaks them down. She creates little goals. She puts those forward. And that also, that ability to break things down and turn it into something new is how she's able to be like, it's how she's able to connect that realm of greater meaning that can seem so numinous, especially here in Pisces, seems so numinous and intermixing, and break that down into its little constituent components and be like, oh, okay, like yes, it's all one cosmic ocean, but there is something different about the part of the cosmic ocean that nurtures through the food that we're eating, and we can recognize our connection to the earth and our connection to life through this meal that we're eating and the way that we prepared it. And yes, it's all part of that cosmic ocean, but there seems to be a difference between that sleeping state and that waking state. And so we can create a little bit of a ritual between waking to sleeping and waking, and a morning ritual and an evening ritual. And she's able to imbue those little acts throughout her day with meaning, because she's able to really take it from that cosmic oneness and break it down into like, yes, but there's this differentiated piece here, and that's important to recognize, and let's put that into motion and action. She's also naturally ruled over by Mercury, and has that in that mental aspect to things, right? That cerebral aspect to things, as Mercury rules over. And she, part of the mythos that I feel comes up with this is that, so she is the part of the year where we're really starting to see like so the child has been born, but also in uh the agricultural cycle of the year, things are ripening, right? This is when the grapes are ripening. This is when like wheat is ripening. So things are ripening under the sun in Leo. And Virgo is when you first start harvesting some of those things. The harvest season goes still into Libra, but Virgo is the beginning of that. And she does a lot of the separating and the sorting of the chaff and the wheat. And once again, breaking things down into its smaller components, like breaking down the components of the grains from the field and separating them into what's useful and what we release, what we burn, right? And in another permutation of the mythology, where you get the sun who starts to like really rule your own life, and blaze with that energy, you also get, right after that, you get the priestess who starts to set up the rituals in your life, right? And creates that sacred aspect to it all, right? So moving on from Virgo, we now have Libra, who is also ruled by Venus, is an air sign and is a cardinal sign. So it's interesting that this house that is has so much to do with relationships is an air sign, right? Because it's not particularly emotional. That would be more the realm of water, and it's not particularly passionate. That would be more the realm of fire. But it's an air sign, and it still rules over so many of our relationships and so many of our interactions with people. And the way that Libra tends to do this is that she's the mental space for human interaction and communication, right? More so than feeling out. Like, waters a lot of the time will sit in a room and be able to feel like there is just waves of anxiety coming off that person, or there's so much joy coming off that person, and like I can feel into that, and I can like connect and almost telepathically feel what's going on over there. Libra will pick up on that energy, but it's not so much as a like as it's not so much how do I say this? I said this to a client the other day in an astrology reading. Libra picks up on that energy so that she knows how to harmonize the space. It's not so much that she's having this kind of underwater experience with like this other person, and they're mixing their emotions, as much as she's like, okay, I am in this space, um and I need to harmonize it. I need to make sure this person feels comfortable. I need to make sure all my dinner guests feel comfortable, right? I always think of Libra as the person who hosts like that dinner party. And she's making sure that the space is balanced, that it's harmonious, that it flows well. Um, Whereas a Cancer, for instance, would want to be the Cancer is going to be kind of more like, oh, like, here's food, let me take care of you, like, how are you doing, like, they want to interact a lot in the emotional aspect, and that can be very nurturing, and that can also like allow for awkwardness, right, where they want to connect, like a mom who's just like maybe overly indulgent and just like, oh yeah, like, here's more food, eat it, please eat it. Like, my mom's Italian. That's her thing. Like, anyone comes over, I've got food, I'll make you food, eat it, how are you doing? um Libra wants more of the harmony, right? So she's not going to be as much like, oh, let's dive into all your emotions. It's like, let's maintain this space, right? Like, let's maintain our communication. Let's be witty and say something like fresh and great, and let's continue on this conversation. Um, and that's where she really brings in that Venus aspect uh, of harmony. In some of the Greek myths, Venus is the mother of harmonia, and of harmony, and so she keeps that space, right? As far as like the cosmic myth, she really creates this sense of balance, and so the sacred aspect of Libra really is staying in balance with the world, and where that ends up um, as our experience of the season is typically Libra is in that part of the season when night and day are most balanced, right? And so in that kind of more sacred cosmic, Libra is those scales that we weigh ourselves on, right? In the Egyptian tradition, she's related to Mayat, the goddess of truth, where our our lives are weighed to see if they balance with this cosmic truth. Um, and so she ends up being, most of the all the signs below the horizon tend to be very personal. They're our own form of self-expression, or even in Virgo, which is the house of service, they're the way that we serve other people. Libra is the first where we start to get a lot more about our interactions with others, right? It's not how do I serve you? It is, now there are two people here. There are just two people here, and there's this whole relationship, and there's this whole dynamic that has a lot more to do than just you, right? Has a lot more to do with than just you. And then we move into Scorpio, which is really where those relationships start to really mix it up, right? Scorpio rules the eighth house. Oh, and the seventh house is the house of relationships. Scorpio rules the eighth house, which is known as the house of like sex, death. Some people say taxes, but it's a house of deep exchanges, right? One of the better explanations I've heard about this is it's the house wherein you have you have a significant exchange with something else that transforms you in some way, right? Whether that be through a sexual encounter, whether that be through just having a really powerful, deep experience. It's in Scorpio, so it's a water sign. And so it really has that, like, those emotional depths, right? So you can be at your Libra dinner party and having a nice casual conversation. Like maybe it's deeply philosophic, possibly if there's some Sagittarian influence, or it's just fun. Scorpio is like, but wait, where's the grit in this? Like, tell me who you really are. Like, let's get to the bottom of this, right? And it wants to dive a lot deeper. Traditionally, it's ruled by Mars, and it's in the time of the year that in the Roman calendar, Mars, who rises up in the spring, kind of gets put back into the ground in the time of Scorpio. And there's whole rituals to end the season of war. There's whole rituals to end the season of harvest, which ends in Libra. And now things in the sun itself is starting to set earlier. The nights are starting to get a little bit darker. We're starting to withdraw within and to go into those inner realms, to go into the realm of the unconscious, to go into that more chthonic space. It's ruled in modern astrology by Pluto, which rules over all those same spaces, the Lord of the underworld. And so that chthonic underworld, that inner space, that unconscious space, the realm of the depths, it's a fixed sign, and it's a fixed water sign. So I used to think of this as ice, and you'll definitely hear people talk about it as ice because Scorpios can get a little stingy sometimes. But now I think of it more as like just the water that collects in like underground reservoirs, right? It's that lowest point of water. It's got the deepest level of like connection with that because it's dived really, really low. Um, and it's really the house and the sign and the planet of transformation, right? It is what, if you're looking for the forces that cause the most transformation in your life, you're going to want to look at to see where Pluto is. You're going to want to look to see where Scorpio is. You're going to want to look to see your third or your eighth house. Um, and it's also tied to Mars. It's still very much tied to Mars. After Scorpio is Sagittarius. So in Scorpio, you'll hear us talk about in our session or in our workshop, because it goes so deep and it dives so deep. That's where I really encourage a lot of depth work and work with the archetypes, work with the unconscious. Shamanic work is really powerful there. And what a lot of this work does is it's gritty work, right? It's hard work. This is the shadow work, right? This is like the parts that we don't want to see, but we got to dive in and see them, and it burns and it hurts. And it like burns as in like the alchemy, that alchemist fire, and it's uncomfortable. But when we come out of it, hopefully, if we've done the work, we see with a clearer vision. And that clearer vision is that Sagittarius vision, where those unconscious projections now have been faced and they've been challenged and they've been overcome. And now we get to see what we couldn't see before. We get to see into the far horizon with Sagittarius, the archer, who is a mutable fire sign. And as we get to see what the world really actually does look like, we get to adapt to that, right? It's classically ruled over by Jupiter, Zeus, Jove, who is the planet and the god of expansion, the patriarch of the pantheon. So there's so many links to Jupiter and clear vision in mythology. I mean, the sun and moon were seen to be his eyes as Skyfather. He at points not always, but at points he rules over the fates. Sometimes he doesn't rule over the fates, but he is the only one who can see as much as the fates can see. And he is seen as having clear vision, right? And being a source of inspiration, spirituality, the foundation really of spirituality and later traditions. So he's a big deal, right? He's Jupiter. And in Sagittarius, we really have that clear vision to be able to see the truth of things. And that's why Sagittarius are known as being so blunt, is because they're just interested in the truth. It's in the ninth house, which is the house of travel, exploration, and also education. And so it takes those traits of um, Mercury and Gemini and gathering that information, and it turns it into a broader picture, right? And it turns it into a broader way of seeing the world and into a paradigm rather than just data or facts. As we move on, we now have Capricorn as a cardinal in Earth. And Capricorn really asks us to take that vision and do something with it, right? It's an Earth sign, so it's very practical. Sagittarius is like, I got fired, let's just experience it all and let's try to put it together, and this is great. I can see so much here. Capricorn is like, it's great, we saw it, now let's do something with it because I want to manifest something real here. And this is the first sign of winter, so it's an interesting relationship that it happens in winter, and I think that like can get drawn to the Capricorn sign where he's the fish goat, and linked into that watery element of possibility, of the dream, of that kind of cosmic vision, but is working to actually press that into reality. And Capricorn also signals the beginning of it hits on the winter solstice, so it's the beginning of the sun growing stronger, right? With that determination of like, I'm going to carry this vision all throughout the year, even during the darkest time of the winter. I still have the strength to persist and carry on. Capricorn is ruled over by Saturn, which he gets a really bad rap in modern astrology. He gets a bad rap in most astrology. But he's the Lord of Karma. He just teaches us that we reap what we sow. Like, and yeah, that can be a bitch sometimes, but that's because we reap what we sow, right? Where it feels like shackles is that sometimes we're not only reaping what we sow, but we're reaping what was sown into our lives, right? So we're also reaping like the childhood traumas, and we're also reaping the things that we didn't really have control over, the parts of the system that we didn't have control over. But when we work with Saturn, and when we work with that energy of Capricorn, who's able to take the vision and the clarity of Sagittarius and turn it into something very real, we can adapt, right? Like we can adapt, we can see a new vision, and we can grow in that direction. We can take that adaptability from Sagittarius and that vision, and we can create a new vision of how we're going to move forward. And Capricorn is great for that energy. And he's in the 10th house, which is that house of our public persona, right? It's the way that the rest of the world sees us, and it's the way, well, the rest of the world sees us a lot as our ascendant, but it's our relationship with the rest of the world in a public sphere. And so it really does speak to what are you doing with all of this, right? What are you doing with your first through 9 houses? Like, how are you putting that into the world around you? How are you taking all that karma that you've collected from, like, this is just naturally who I am, to this is who I own as being who I am and what I've collected to me, and these are the conversations I've had, and this is the home environment I had and the home environment that I create, and this is the projects that I've created and the art that I've created and the expression of myself, and the ways that I have played and the children that I have. And this is a service I've done for others and the ways that I've served others and the ways that I have brought meaning into each act. And this is the way that I've balanced my relationships with others and balanced my relationship with the cosmos, and the way that I've dived in deep with others, and the sexual experiences I've had with others, and the transformative experiences I've had with others. And this is the vision that I've gathered from all of this exploration. And now I'm going to make it into something. I'm going to make it into me, right? Me in this, as this subject in this greater narrative of the rest of the world, right? What are we doing with that? And that's what Capricorn really does. And that's what Saturn really does, is look at all that karma. What are you doing with it, right? And when we really embrace that and really start to work with working in that sphere and in that realm, it's great. It's really actually, I just figured out I can do that. It's really actually, it's fantastic, right? Because then we're contributing, then we're building something, we're making something. Where it gets depressing and where it feels oppressive is when we look at everything as things that are happening to us, right? And we feel like we have a loss of power from that. But Capricorn doesn't take that shit. Like, right? Capricorn steps up and it moves forward, right? And it puts that meaning into action, and it enters in the phase of Aquarius, in the 11th house, a fixed air sign. So a very, I say cerebral, but for some reason, cerebral to me doesn't feel objective enough for Aquarius. Aquarius is like reading your life as a book, and it's just characters, and you're like, oh, this is cool. But you don't necessarily get caught up in the subjectiveness of like, oh yeah, no, I am that character. Okay, that's nice. And you just keep going, right? It's not like Leo, which is like, oh, but who am I as a character? It's like, okay, no, that's one character amongst many characters. And what we've been talking about is how Aquarius really, it's that lightning bolt, of inspiration from those realms of the ideas, right? So when we create the system in Capricorn, when we create our message, and when we take our message and we create it in form, there needs to be a feedback process that allows us to adapt further once we get to Pisces, but allows us to really take that form that we're starting to create and imbue it with new inspiration from the realms of ideas, right? And Aquarius is really great at doing that. And the energy there allows for that realm of thoughts and ideas and inspirations to flow through, um, into new inventions, into new works of art, into new ways of envisioning the world. Um, and in that airway, right, where Sagittarius does a lot of that. But Sagittarius, I mean, if we're talking about these different forms of inspiration, Sagittarius does that with fire, but it's passion, right? And it's philosophical, but it's a passionate philosophy. It's a philosophy you live by. It's not a philosophy that you can just write down in your book and be like, okay, now everything has a nice order to it. It's good. Um, it has to burn a little bit, right? Scorpio will get a lot of new inspiration, but it's because it's dug in deep and it ripped everything up, and it's like looking at like all the crud drug up, and it's like, oh, okay, cool. Like I can see how I can transmute this mud into gold. This is great. Aquarius is more, it's just taking those ideas down, and then it's like, oh look, no, let's completely reimagine the world in this much more um uh mentally inspired space. And it's great for that. It's really fantastic for that. And so what it allows for typically is a lot of the mixing of the old and the new, and new forms and in new ways, um which is funny because it's fixed. And so that ends up being where it ends up showing its fixed nature. I feel like out of all of the elements, the air signs are the weirdest with who is cardinal, who is fixed, and who is mutable. Not so much. Maybe Gemini is mutable. Um, but the air signs, it's an interesting relationship to them. But where this comes through the most with Aquarius is that they do have a drive to remain consistently true to the vision that comes through, right? It's kind of like a wind that just consistently blows, right? And because of that, it pushes through. um I think that's the best way to really describe it, is when when Aquarius gets one of those insights from the realms of ideas, it's going to work with that. It's going to move with that. Whereas like Gemini is like, oh, there's a bajillion ideas out there. Great. I want to taste, like, I want to try them all. I want to taste them all. I want to experience them all. Um, and Libra can be like, oh, there's this new environment that I get to experience. And like there's this new place that I get to harmonize. And there's this new interaction with these people that I get to balance out. And like, great, there's all these little dynamic systems that pop up that I get to like play with and start a new relationship with, right? And start new relationships with people. Aquarius is going to be a lot more like, no, I have this vision and I need to see it through, right? And then it moves, and it's in the house, it's in the 11th house, which is the house of, uh, it's the house of friends and dreams. It's a hard house to describe. Um, 10 is like who you are in that public sphere. 11 is sort of the community that you create in that public sphere, but it's also your vision. You don't always necessarily, it isn't so much that we necessarily always reach it, but it's the guiding vision that we're reaching for, that sort of like you're reaching out to grab it, you have that vision, and then in the process of getting there, you create your 10th house, right? In the process of getting to that vision, you create the rest of life. Um, and so it's those big dreams that move you, that you see in that inspired Aquarian state, um, and you press forward to. It is traditionally ruled by Saturn. In the modern day, it is ruled by Uranus, who has that kind of rebel energy, which is interesting because traditionally it is ruled by Saturn, who also has that rebel energy in the Saturnalia, where everything gets flipped. And so you see that dynamic play back and forth between Saturn and Capricorn, which tends to be a little bit more traditional. And it's like, hey, if we just harken back to the good old times and we implement those ways, we're going to be a-okay. And then you see Saturn and Aquarius, that's more of the Saturnalia, which is like, throw it all up in the air and see what happens, right? Like, let's just level the playing field. In the Saturnalia, slaves would play with their masters, like they played dice games, like people gave presents that were easily exchangeable, that weren't super expensive, to each other, so that nobody was like shamed by how much they could or could not give. The city was all lit up, and there, at least amongst the men, there was more equality. Gender equality wasn't a thing in Rome, but it was a way of harkening back to a golden age and a golden time by destroying the structures, or challenging and momentarily eliminating the structures of the modern day. When we move on into the 12th house nowadays it's the house of the unconscious, it's the house of the unseen, it's the mystical house. And we get into the mutable water where everything kind of flows and fluctuates, and we're back. Essentially, we're at the end of the life cycle here. So we're preparing for the new cycle, whether that's a new year, a new life, a new project. And we're releasing the old, and we're making space for the dreams to come up with something new. And we're letting go of all the karmas and attachments, and even the dreams that we thought were the purpose. Now we're letting them all just mix back up together in that cosmic ocean, and we're pulling a new bucket, right? And we're seeing what is going to stick for the next cycle, the next year. The 12th house, it's ruled by Pisces, which we've talked a lot about. It's a mutable, adaptable sign. In the modern day, it's ruled by Neptune. And out of all of the modern day, I mean, Pluto works really well for Scorpio, but Neptune really, really does describe this Pisces energy. And that ability to shape shift, and that ability to give dreams and inspiration and also delusion. Its traditional ruler is Jupiter, though, who was also a shapeshifter and who also had the ability to give that mystic experience and that mystic communion. In the later days of Rome, Zeus became Amun Zeus, which linked him to the Egyptian god Amun, who was very much like Brahman in the Hindu tradition, right? The underlying divine factor of all reality. And so Zeus ends up becoming this very mystical, all encompassing aspect of the Roman religion. Um, and you see that in Pisces, whereas like this is the Jupiter who's still like, he's a playboy still, he's out exploring, he's out learning, he's teaching, he's interacting. As far as Sagittarius energy is, they're still seeking, there's still the horizon, they want to figure out what's over there, they want to figure it all out and bring it together. And then in Pisces, like, they've made the leap and they're now part of the one, right? And it's that all those points of definition that allowed there to be exploration, because you were moving from this place to that place and exploring, that is now all just one ocean, right? There's still room to explore, but it's that cosmic ocean, and the definitions that separate things are like melting, right? They're just kind of flowing away. Some interesting things when we get deeper into, well, yeah. And so that's Pisces. That's the end of winter, which opens up the next season. Some interesting things while I have this open when we get into looking at okay, there was a bit of a glitch there. But essentially what I was going to say is, you had the traditional rulers would have been Mars, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter. And where you can see is that the planets, uh, Mars is always across from Venus. So Scorpio is across, Scorpio Mars would have been across Venus. Taurus, Mars Aries is across Venus Libra. Jupiter is always across Mercury. So Jupiter Pisces across from Mercury Virgo. Jupiter Sagittarius across from Gemini Mercury. And then Saturn is the one who is across from the moon and the sun. And the moon and the sun are the only ones who don't get double signs. In the modern day, obviously, it shifts it up in the modern astrology. But yeah, so that's a quick run through. It's sort of Pisces over the place run through of the houses, of cardinals and elements and planets and signs. We'll break this down more so in the future, but I just wanted to give a general overview of the system that we're working in. Okay, great. You have a great night. Bye.